I want to welcome our guest here, Tara Reade. Tara is the producer of The Kim Iverson Show and host of the Politics of Survival podcast. Tara, thank you so much for making the time tonight.
No, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
So I reached out to you in December because you made some news. You are obviously calling on the new Republican majority to investigate your claims against Joe Biden. And I just wanted to, we were going to do this interview before the holidays, and I think it's even more timely now than it was then because now the new Congress is here. And so what are your hopes for such an investigation if it happens, and what do you see as the likelihood of it happening in the first place?
My hopes and dreams, right, for justice. But yeah, unfortunately, I'm not sure. I mean, I know that there has been talk that they will investigate Joe Biden. Whether they will or not, it remains to be seen. It took so long for them to get the speaker, in place. But yeah, I think Marjorie Taylor Greene tweeted out it should be done. Matt Gaetz responded it should be done. So we'll see.
Yeah, I believe Lauren Boebert did also.
Okay, there you have it.
Yeah.
So, my hope is that they at least investigate. And I think if they do that, other women will most likely come forward. I can't guarantee that will happen, but I do know of at least two that have not been public that had serious complaints, almost equal to mine. I won't go into any more detail than that. And it's up to them to come forward. So hopefully they will. I think it's like, with Cuomo, the Democrats are ready to throw him under the bus, right? The nursing home scandal and all of that. They knew all along, the Democrats did, that he had a problem with sexual misconduct. There was enough reports and rumors and people that had worked in the Democratic Party that had these experiences, but it took the DNC, the leadership to say, we're done with Cuomo. And then they used it, right? Then all of a sudden, Me Too came into action. So I think that in the case of the Democrats, Me Too is sort of this mantle they pick up or put down depending on their political convenience.
Yeah, I mean, I think we said that exact thing when Cuomo, when it looked like his goose was cooked and that he was going to have to step down. It was very obvious. I think Russell and I even said this at the time. We didn't have a YouTube show. We were back on Facebook. But we said it seems as though they really want him gone because they know this nursing home scandal is looking really bad. And so they're going to use these Me Too accusations as a way to push him out the door so that they don't have to look into what happened at the homes.
Exactly, because there were people died and there was such a liability. And he obviously lied publicly and his staff admitted lying and, messing with the numbers. Those are criminal actions. But what's really amazing is they knew about these sexual misconduct issues all this time and did nothing. And then, it became a thing. Now, I stood shoulder to shoulder with Lindsey Boylan and supported her, and the rest of the people that came forward. I know that they had valid claims, but imagine how it was for them, similar to me, being silenced, being smeared, until it was convenient for the Democrats. And then all of a sudden, then the story was lifted. So it's just, unfortunately, the Democrats tend to infiltrate movements like the Me Too. And they tend to infiltrate identity politics movements of different kinds with a very, draconian interest in voters and in, swinging those votes towards them or, to peddle, to get money. I don't think it's sincere. I don't think these are sincere things they care about. And I'm no longer a Democrat. I'm an independent, and I will never vote Democrat again.
Yeah, I mean, look, my real red pill moment was learning in 2015 for the first time that Bill Clinton had been credibly accused of rape. I had never known that before. And I was a pretty politically savvy person. I was young, but I paid attention. And the fact that the first time I was hearing about it was when his wife was running for president a second time was not only terrifying on its face, just because what a horrifying thing to learn about a person, right? But it was also horrifying to learn that this had been kept from me my whole life. Right. And this kind of goes into what Russell's first question is for you. So I'm going to toss to Russell now. So go ahead.
Okay, my relationship to the corporate media is like somebody who escaped Scientology. I was in the cult, so
Yeah.
that element of your story fascinated me throughout, because there was this very clear trajectory in the coverage where at first they seemed to take it seriously when they didn't think the nominee was going to be Bernie Sanders, because they didn't really like Joe Biden. They didn't really want Joe Biden to be the nominee, and they thought they had other options. So at first, they did take it seriously at the beginning. They did litigate it, and your claims had as much documentation as any such claims in the Me Too era had. Quite a bit more than claims that knocked out a lot of prominent people. And at first they treated it that way. And all of a sudden, as soon as they said, oh, it's going to be Biden or it's going to be Sanders, they turned on a dime. And the way that they were able to steer their consumers, that really factors. I knew a lot of people who the day before believe women. What do you mean women lie? Do you know how rare that is? What are you talking about? It's so rare. The next day, I saw, I'm not just talking media figures, I'm talking people I saw personally saying, you know, unfortunately, people lie about it. The day before, they would have called you a monster if you had suggested such a thing. The way the media was able to just steer them that way about something that had been this major moral crusade, the way they revived, and forgive me for using the phrase, but this is what it's always been known as, they brought back the nuts and sluts defense just for you. With the Politico article, with all of these articles just smearing you. Yeah, I saw a great quote from you where you said, because I have what credit rating do you need to be able to make this accusation? Like they went after you for being poor, for having a history of not being able to make the rent. I mean, by that standard, a lot of us are not credible. I'm not credible. What was it like to be in the middle of that and to experience that betrayal? I felt betrayed on your behalf. What was it like to actually be the focus of that?
It reminds me of like a hurricane. It was quiet and then boom. This is what it was like. Two things. First of all, you use the word litigate. The media can't litigate anything. And I come from this from a legal point of view because I have a law degree. So the media can speculate. They can pontificate. They can do hit pieces, but they certainly can't litigate. And that word was used by Biden's press secretary when she said, "Oh, Tara Reade's case was," and dismissed me. Tara Reade's case was litigated. No, it never was. It was never even investigated, and it was never investigated by authorities. It was never investigated by the Senate, and that's what your audience needs to know. I came forward in 2019 before Joe Biden was the valid nominee. You're right. And when I started coming forward in 2019 and 2020, I was immediately called a Russian agent by Edward Isaac Dovere of The Atlantic. It started going all over social media that I was a Russian asset before anything. Then when the New York Times and Washington Post did their thing, I was their whipping post for the summer of 2020. They did every kind of angle of hit pieces. They called me up on the phone and said, "Do you realize someone has said that you have an online Russian boyfriend? How do you respond? Rumor has it." And I said, "Lisa, you work for the New York Times. You're not a tabloid. I don't have an online boyfriend. We've had this discussion. I don't have a boyfriend. I'm not married right now. So what are you talking about?" Two unnamed sources say that you do. One will go on the record. And so I got my lawyer on the phone. I said, "I don't have one, so this is not true." And they wouldn't retract it. They wouldn't retract many things. They said I lied about, a CNN went on and said I lied about my education. They started really attacking me.
Right.
And I never lied. I was threatened with prison, 25 to 30 years in prison. There was a troll farm. You mentioned Bernie Sanders. I kid you not, 48 hours after Bernie Sanders dropped, I had the K-Hive, that troll farm, and the Justice Democrats troll farms after me, like en masse. They were writing emails and making phone calls to the Monterey DA to have them investigate me.
And this was
They
right
did-
as
Wow.
this was right as your story was gaining traction.
Momentum.
I remember writing an article because Chris Hayes one night on MSNBC finally kind of had a face-to-face with his audience and say, okay, listen, there are some times when we have to take cases seriously even though we don't want to. Very, very mildly suggesting that there may have been something to what you were saying. Within minutes, the hashtag was trending "Fire Chris Hayes," right?
Exactly.
The Democrats, they
did it.
wanted him gone for that.
So this is big tech. So now with the Twitter files, you're seeing the collusion, right? The collusion
sure.
is real. The collusion is operated by a PR machine, by Hollywood, by the commercial artist agency. Biden is a client. And I don't think a lot of people realize that the president has a Hollywood agency.
I
right?
did not know that.
Yes, it's CAA. And you know who told me that? Who educated me on all of this was Rose McGowan, because she's been through it for a decade. And she stood by me and stood up for me and just got decimated doing that. Anthony
I wonder how
Zankus-
he missed out on the Top Gun Maverick lead. How that went to Tom Cruise. He's probably
He has the aviators.
He
They
is,
could have
he's got the glasses
on
and
the
everything.
budget.
But I wanted to say too, you know, with the Time's Up, just so you know.
Oh yeah,
I
no,
went-
I want to know about that because that to me is fascinating. Yep, go ahead.
Okay, go ahead and ask the question that you want to ask.
Well, no, it goes back to what you were saying, actually what Russell was saying earlier, that early on when you first came forward, they were taking you somewhat seriously because they didn't think it was going to be Biden. They didn't think Biden was going to be the nominee. And according to the timeline on your website, you actually said that someone from Time's Up actually said, we have a partner who's working on the Biden campaign in Virginia. And so this is what I took from your site. If Biden drops out after Virginia, which would have been Super Tuesday, we may be able to help you. Because they assumed he was going to be out after, or they thought maybe he'll be out after Super Tuesday. And once there's not that conflict there, we'll be able to help you. Until then, as long as Biden's in the running, we can't. That's what I found to be really shocking.
No. It's worse than that. Two things on that. And that is all bullshit from Time's Up. Time's Up, Anita Dunn, who we now know who she is, was one of the founders of Time's Up. She's also owns Knickerbocker PR firm, which was the hired firm by Biden's campaign. When I went to Time's Up Legal Defense Fund, Anita Dunn, Hillary Rosen, and Tina Chen all knew about my case. One of them was on the phone when they were saying they couldn't take my case for the reason that you listed, right? For one of the reasons. The other was they said it was too political and all these other reasons.
Right, because the
actuality
501c3,
was,
right.
And what they didn't tell me is that it was a conflict of interest and that Anita Dunn was getting paid by Joe Biden. So the few months that they were talking to me and trying to extrapolate every piece of evidence they could from me and string me along and act like they were going to get a lawyer for me, she was getting paid. It was close to $1 million. Her PR firm was by the Biden campaign. I was like, and so who exposed that was Ryan Grimm, and then Law and Crime did a deep dive. Then the New York Times finally picked it up during the Cuomo investigation because Time's Up did the same thing to the Cuomo survivors. And they found in the criminal investigation, they found emails between Time's Up Legal Defense Fund and Cuomo upper level staff saying, look at the Tara Reade story. And this is in the case. Look at the Tara Reade story. We can now victim shame on the record. And they were going back and forth how to get rid of so the Time's Up, which if your audience doesn't know, Legal Defense Fund and Time's Up in general is supposed to help women coming forward when it's a powerful person. And they got caught and they've now been dismantled for doing catch and kill for powerful men. Anita Dunn had to resign and step down. She had to step down as White House advisor. Tina Chen and Hillary Rosen, very corrupt. I mean, it's so corrupt. So Biden spent $2.2 million in PR during the summer of 2020 to silence my story. I don't even know how much he spent to silence the Hunter Biden story. All of this was also being done, as we see with the Twitter files, simultaneously with big tech by shadow banning me, silencing me. Same thing with the Hunter Biden. They silenced the New York Post, a media corporation. I mean, I didn't realize when I came forward, I was up against such a big machine. I was against not a person, a machine that had a lot of endless funds. And it was, and they destroyed everything in my life. They like just, it was almost like a bulldozer just came through, and I lost my housing. I lost friends. I lost relatives. I lost money. I lost my reputation. I'm still like trying to slowly come back. But it made me more determined, because no one should have to go through what I went through just because they're telling the truth. Sexual assault and sexual harassment is not political. It's not political, and it shouldn't be. It is what it is. It happens. It crosses every socioeconomic line. And the fact that the Biden campaign used their power and resources to weaponize big tech, to weaponize Time's Up. Not only did they do that, they weaponized the DOJ and the FBI. And that's another part of my story we can get to. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I want to get into some of this because, obviously you went to work for Joe Biden in the early 90s. And it's safe to assume, I would think, that you went to work for him because you believed in him at the time, and not only in him, but in the sort of system that he served. I mean, Joe Biden was far from a renegade. He was always a company man, right? So you had to be a believer in both him and this overall system that you now describe in a much different light. And so how has this experience changed the way you view not just him, not just politics, but you obviously have a very broad systemic critique now, talking about, the intersection of state power and corporate power and tech power and things like that. So, how has that process sort of changed you, and at what pace did that happen? Because the assault itself happened now, 30 years ago?
Yeah, 20. Yeah. It's 20 some years ago. Yeah. It was 1993. I was in my 20s, and I thought I heard a motorcycle go back behind one of your. Was that a motorcycle that I heard?
It could have been Russell.
I'm in the middle of Harlem here, so.
Oh, okay.
That was probably.
I'm on a boring suburban street. I don't think any of my neighbors are cool enough to have a motorcycle.
I'm in the middle of nowhere, so in the Pacific Northwest. So it's very quiet here. But what I was going to say is that, understand I came from other Democrats, like in my family, right? Like my mother. Right. Though she was a Democrat, she was also a member of the Progressive Labor Party. My great-grandmother was a communist. My mother was a very much...
Yeah, that's me.
That's them. That's him out there.
Yeah. All right. Well,
and Russell's on the 5th floor, too, man. That was loud.
That's hardcore. Yeah. No, sometimes we get swarms, like it's like clubs, where they're not even on motorcycles. What that sounds like is those guys have dirt bikes.
Right.
Oh, okay.
And they go out in swarms and do wheelies on dirt bikes through the middle of Harlem.
Okay.
Oh, that's Extra Bulla. Tara, I think you know Extra Bulla. He says he's outside your apartment yelling Stella. That's him.
Like,
go down go down there, buzz him in. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
I forgot.
Sorry, Tara, go ahead.
Where was I leaving off?
No, just that you were talking about your family history. They were Democrats, communist, labor people. Yeah.
Democrats, and I was, and it's the 90s, right? So we believed in the Democratic Party. I was a good little, Democrat. I worked for Leon Panetta, and then as an intern, and I worked on a congressional race as a field manager, and I was really into environmental issues. We were trying to preserve at that point the Monterey Bay, the Ocean Sanctuary Act. So these were all things I cared about, and then I got hired at the interview with Biden, and so I didn't, I didn't have a bad opinion of him. But when I got there, shortly after I got there, I got the real scoop, which was that he was considered a lightweight and kind of not as. He wasn't intellectual. Like you'd see Leon Panetta up at 10 at night, like reading the details of a brief, right?
Yeah.
Biden, they had to tell him how to vote. If he came back from lunch with Orrin Hatch, he'd vote with Orrin Hatch unless they stopped him. He just was like, whatever. Like he was a partier. I know they say he doesn't drink or whatever, but I'm telling you, I don't know what all of the details of that recreational behavior, but a lot of it revolved around women and other things and distractions. And that was my impression, my opinion. Watching, he was very much a lightweight. He wasn't an intellectual. He was into the social part of it.
Right. And then so what I was asking is, so from going there, working in that environment, now obviously you're far from a mainstream Democrat anymore. Was it just your experience with him? Was it your experience in the subsequent decades, just sort of examining the systems around him, the sort of systems that protect people like him? Because, that boiled over in 2017 with, the emergence of the Me Too hashtag. But obviously that hashtag was decades in the making. So I just was wondering, what that evolution was like.
I think it was like a lot of people said disillusionment just started creeping in, like
Right.
Around that time after 2016. I think it was around the Hillary Clinton thing, watching her laugh over Gaddafi in that sort of psychopathic way.
Right.
I'd always been anti-imperialist and anti-war. And when I was in Biden's office, one of the things I really objected to was he has a hatred towards Russia. I mean, it's a hatred. And I heard it with my own ears. And this is after the fall, because Russia, the Soviet Union fell in 1991. So we're talking 93.
Right,
this is when Americans were in pillaging, basically, economically. And he was one of those that wanted to bring it to its knees while it did. He was very hawkish towards war in general. And I didn't know that until I knew that. And then I knew. Now, Obama fooled me. I thought Obama was going to be different. And then when I saw him pick Joe Biden, I was like worried. But I still voted for him, right? Even with Joe Biden as vice president. And I struggled with it. And in fact, one of the people that I talked to came forward and said, she told me about the sexual assault and was struggling with Joe Biden being vice president.
No, but this is someone who has not come forward publicly yet, you're saying?
No, she did. Yeah, it's.
Oh, she did. So this is one of the
one of my two people actually that I told at the time. A friend of my daughter's, or excuse me, a mother of my daughter, because we would all talk, and then a law school friend also. I told at that time because I was really struggling with it, and of course I didn't even consider going public. So to go back to the original time, I had filed a report for the sexual harassment, and I was going to tell the whole thing, but I was going through the process, and they didn't have an organized process back then. You went to this counseling office, and I did like an intake form, and then I didn't hear anything back. So I went through Senate protocol. I went to my supervisor, the two supervisors above them, which was the chief of staff, Ted Kaufman. And they just shut me down. And Ted Kaufman still works with Biden. And James Carville, whom you referenced with the slut shaming thing, he was the one who made the, drag a $100 bill through
a trailer park. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. He's been advising on Biden's campaign and still does public appearances. So you have this old guard of what to do when someone comes forward, and there is you discredit them, you call them crazy, and you slut shame them. And that's their playbook. That's what they did.
You got George Stephanopoulos out there anchoring Channel 7 News. He was one of the Bill Clinton attack dogs in the early 90s, viciously going after these women who came forward. Carville was one. Paul Begala was one. He's been a CNN contributor for decades. I mean, no, there's no offense that'll get you on their bad side as long as you do it on behalf of the people you're supposed to, go to bat for.
Well, and that what's really tragic about that is I think we could probably have a broad social cultural agreement on going after sexual assault. People have wives, they have daughters, they have mothers, but because people on the right see it weaponized according to your political affiliation, they automatically roll their eyes as soon as they hear time out because they don't trust it. They don't trust it to be neutral. So when they hear this person's been accused. If they're a Republican, they say, well, who knows? And if it were a Democrat, they wouldn't go after it. I wrote an article about your case called "Why Haven't These Democrats Been Canceled?" And I talked about Joe Biden at length. So I want to ask you a question, because this is fascinating to me for somebody to say this. So you filed your complaint with Biden's longtime office manager, Marianne Baker.
I did.
Okay, so she issued this statement, which I'm sure you're familiar with. In all my years working for Senator Biden, I never once witnessed or heard of or received any reports of inappropriate conduct, period. Not from Ms. Reade, not from anyone. These clearly false allegations are in complete contradiction to both the inner workings of our Senate office and to the man I know and worked so closely with for almost 2 decades. Now, you're not the only person who's come forward, and she's broadly, categorically saying she never heard anything like this. What do we have, 6, 7 women come forward about inappropriate touching? 8. So is she just lying? Is she self-deluded, lying? What's going on here?
She's got to be really elderly at this point, because she was older when I worked there. So I'm thinking she's older. She benefited, obviously, from working with Biden. She was there and witnessed the sexual harassment. I complained to her about it. Now, I hadn't told her about the sexual assault. I told her about the sexual harassment, but not only was she witness, she was participating in it. Also, she was the person who gave me the gym bag to go find him. She was in a frantic hurry. So she was the one telling me to go meet him. So I don't know. I know that she knows because of the way he always used to have staff with him. And that's why it was unusual for me to see him alone. And it was just like wrong place, wrong time for me, you know. She was always kind of a very acerbic person. They went through a lot of staff. I remember one of the things she said to me at the interview was, well, we just want to know that you won't quit. And I'm like, I remember thinking, I was too young to really understand, but if someone in an interview talks about how much turnover they're having, that's a red flag.
Right.
So why they were having the turnover could have been a million things. I don't know why. It could have been bad luck. It could have been a toxic, hostile work environment. You know, you take your pick. I don't know, but we won't know, will we? Because the employment records or any kind of complaints are sealed in the University of Delaware. And Joe Biden said that it's not in the public interest to release them. What's interesting to me about this classified documents thing is, boy, that complaint I filed is under lock and key or it's destroyed, right? But top secret documents are in his garage next to his Corvette where his son's in and out. I don't know.
Right.
I mean, right?
Well, maybe that's where he has the complaint.
Yeah. Maybe it's in the Corvette.
He's storing it in the glove compartment.
And I mean, doesn't the Corvette just say everything? Come on. I mean, no offense to the audience members that have Corvettes, I guess. I don't want to get you in trouble, but
my father-in-law had one until a few months ago, but he sold it. So we can trash Corvettes now without me getting my knees broken. From
a female point of view, you know, just in our culture, it's a signal of a man going through a midlife crisis. Only I think his has lasted for like 3 decades.
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to, when I first reached out to you via DM, I mentioned about the Democrats' long record of hypocrisy on these sexual abuse issues. I mean, we've mentioned a couple examples, obviously going back Carville.
They still let Bill Clinton speak at the DNC?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And this was a tough thing to explain to people during the 2016 campaign when you had Trump, this obvious sort of odious misogynist with a lot of accusations, leveled against him. That Access Hollywood tape, when that came out against Trump, there's a reason why that was not disqualifying. And it wasn't not disqualifying because it shouldn't have been disqualifying. It wasn't disqualifying because of the Democrats' record of hypocrisy on this issue. It's what I kept trying to explain to people. It's not that what Trump did isn't wrong, but it's not disqualifying when you put it next to who he's running against and her record of smearing her husband's accusers and the people surrounding her and the media apparatus surrounding her, many of whom used to work for her husband. Have you had experiences talking with people like that, trying to get this through to them? Because it's something that was very, very difficult, because Trump is the cartoon version of all this, right? He's the obvious version of all this, but he's not the worst offender by any means. And the Democrats, like I said, just the history on this is just a million miles long, and it's just very hard to get that through to people, I find.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I worked, as you know, in Democratic campaigns, so I can tell you what that's called. It's called switch and bait, right? So when you have a subject matter that you don't want the candidate to have to deal with, you switch it. You bait with another subject. It's just they use the same strategy over and over. I don't understand why people don't get it. And then someone explained to me, they're going, look, people aren't trained operatives, like, like what people do, but like most people just take it at face value. They believe the media, they believe even though they think the candidates might lie about certain things or make promises they can't keep, but basically they think they're in it to try to do good. They don't immediately assume it's corrupt. I think we're now moving into a period where all Americans, what was the maybe the stat? It was like 70 to 80% don't trust the media, the mainstream media anymore.
I think it's about 70, yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's stunning, and I think that's mostly the generation of the millennials coming, or even Gen Z, Gen Z coming up, because they're exposed to more of a 24-hour news cycle and more independent media to some extent, even though we're suppressed. But at the same time, Gen Z can be very much like sheep-like and groupthink-like, and the Democrats love that. They love that, and they're cashing in on that, right? Like, let's look at the abortion issue, right? The abortion issue they could have codified it how long ago, but they chose not to because it's a fundraising tool. It's a fundraising tool for Democrats. So it doesn't matter what the subject matter is, right? If it gets votes and it gets money, you keep that tension. You keep that. And they also, I believe, this is my personal opinion, you may not agree, I think the two parties have merged. We're in a uniparty. It's a war party. It's neocons and neolibs. Basically, the military-industrial complex has taken over, just like Eisenhower warned, just like Kennedy warned. And so you have an easier weaponization of DOJ and FBI, like what happened to me. And we can get to that. So
yeah, go ahead. Yeah, absolutely. You can have the mic on that right now, because I know you mentioned that earlier and we haven't gotten to it yet. So go ahead.
Well, I discovered that a Twitter lawyer reached out to me and said, we've received a subpoena, a sealed subpoena. So I wasn't supposed to know. We went to court and paid a few $1,000s to tell you that your communication has been taken under warrants. The FBI has initiated this, DOJ has completed it, and they're impaneling a grand jury.
Now, when was that?
That was in 2020. That was right when Joe Biden, right before he took office, right before, he did the inaugural thing. So right
after he won the election, but before he was sworn in?
December, right? Yeah,
right.
Late
Okay.
December. So they basically, Twitter fought it a little. And then the Twitter attorney informed me also, by the way, the Twitter attorney was from Perkins Coie. His name, I'll give the first name. I don't want to dox him. Or maybe I should. I won't even say the first name. What I will say is that that particular lawyer worked at one point for the Clintons. Isn't that bizarre? But anyway, so working for Twitter, they pulled all my communication under sealed warrants. I couldn't quash it. And then I've been told later by an FBI whistleblower, I could have spent money trying to do that, and nobody wins a quash. You don't win. Like, that's it. And that Twitter attorney told me that probably all of my communications were taken, including phone, including Gmail, including everything. Like, I was surveilled. Now, an article just recently came out. I'm not sure the veracity of it. I haven't been able to verify it, because to this day, I don't know what they've impaneled a grand jury to do. I don't know if I'm the subject of the case, if I'm part of a bigger case, if it was to protect me or to harm me. I don't know, but I can't know. My lawyer tried to get information and they will not release it. It's all sealed. It's still pending. Will I get that FBI knock and raid? I don't know. Who knows? But the point is that I came forward about Joe Biden. I'm just a regular citizen. I don't have the resources for a PR machine and a bunch of attorneys.
Right.
And they know that. So
Right.
how do you silence someone? You terrorize the shit out of them, right? And you surveil them. So one article said that the purpose of it was that the Biden campaign had contacted DOJ to pull my communications to find out what reporters were working on my story, what journalists, and to find those communications. It's if that's true, that's nauseating, and every single citizen should be worried because, yeah, right now it's me, but it could be you, right?
Yeah.
Well,
But hold on 1 second, Russell. I'm sorry. I have to put this on the screen before we lose it in the chat. But this is our regular viewer, Holly, says this is why we don't come forward. Yeah, it's 100% right. That's 100% right. Because look at, whenever there's a famous person accused of something, I've always said, I don't take the position that you should automatically believe every story, but I think you should take every story seriously and look into it. And assume, I personally assume that when a woman comes forward, she's telling the truth for exactly this reason, especially when you do it against a famous person, because look at everything that can be thrown at you. They don't even have to do it for a reason. Let's say they're not going to do anything to you. Let's say this is all to scare you. They can afford to do that, and you can't afford to fight them when they do that. And so, look at the misbalance. Look at the imbalance of incentive here, right? I mean, what incentive do you have to make this up?
Exactly.
Versus the incentive they have to terrorize you and to keeping your mouth shut. It seems like a no-brainer to me.
Absolutely.
Well, this is something we've talked a lot about on the show. You're describing these horrible abuses of power and abuses of the intelligence agency. Now, I think we're the same generation. We're both Xers. This has been perhaps the most bizarre thing in what is a bizarre political era. The way the whole political establishment is flipped so that now you have to fight the Democrats to try to preserve civil liberties and take refuge very often on the populist right. They're the ones who are actually talking about these abuses of power, whereas you are very hard pressed to find anybody within the left establishment who's not. We did a piece about this. Hakeem Jeffries calls the effort to create a new church committee the Insurrection Protection Committee. So
I know. Yeah.
So at that point, it's such a topsy-turvy world for people who came up when we did. Of course, we're to be on the left, even if you're a liberal, even if you're a very doctrinaire liberal, suspicion of the FBI and the CIA, that was just a given, right?
Yeah.
That just came with the package. And to see them celebrating criminal cretins like John Brennan, and you could not have ever predicted that the GOP would be the ones pushing for a new church committee of all people. And we're getting, as soon as we did a piece about this, we started getting pushback from liberals. What do you mean? You support insurrection? So
yeah, you're right. And I was going to say that, part of my job when I work for political campaigns or politicians was to do press releases. And when you do press releases, they're written a certain way. You, as a journalist or you receive them, right? So you would read them and they're like, okay, here's this talking point, blah, 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 right? That's what the Western media has become. They become literally, they're writing press releases instead of articles. They're not right. They're writing press releases for the empire. The Democrats are literally the war party, the neolibs. They are literally for war. more money to Ukraine. Marianne Williamson, who said she wanted the Department of Peace, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
She tweeted out how the only way there's peace is more bombs to Ukraine. What? Like, what is wrong with you people? Like, that's what I want to say to them. Like, what is wrong with you people? This is a proxy war, and Bernie Sanders is lumped in there. He voted for the funding to go to Ukraine. Had just called the most corrupt country in the world just a few years before, and there are Nazis in Ukraine. They all know that. We've known
they're Tibetan. They're Tibetan mystics. It's been proven. They're Tibetan mystics. They're just the swastika has been misinterpreted.
Right. So, yeah, I know, right? They will go upside down. It's like what they did to Biden. One thing I didn't bring up, I think the most startling tweet I saw during that 2020, I saw all the pretzel-like opinion pieces in the New York Times from these feminists, so-called feminists, saying the Me Too movement and why it doesn't work for me and why it doesn't work for Tara Reade and all that bullshit. One tweet really got my attention, and it went viral because it was so weird. This was how deep the Trump derangement syndrome was. She said, Biden could rape me on Fifth Avenue and I'd still vote for him.
Wow.
Yeah, no. I mean,
wow.
Really viral. And I was just like,
I wish I were surprised by that, but knowing these people,
I'm not. I'm not, but at the same time, that's horrible. Like, how do you do? Well, it's a throwback to remember. I would. Who was it who said it? I would put on my knee pads for Bill Clinton for keeping abortion legal. You remember that? You remember that, don't you?
Oh, I guess I do. God,
it was a big story at that time. She said she was a journalist, and she said I would put on my presidential knee pads for Bill Clinton to thank him for keeping abortion legal. So I mean, there's a history of these supposed feminists coming out to defend these sexual abusers when accusations against them become inconvenient.
Well, and I just, as you know, going back to the Russia thing, I got accused of being a Russian agent from 2019 on, and I had spoken publicly in defense of Russia because I had said something in an interview that pissed everybody off. And what I said was that I believe that if Joe Biden became president, that we would be in war against Russia.
There, well,
here we are. And I predicted it in 2019, and that made a lot of people mad. But it's true because I knew him, and I knew back then. Because when you're a low-level staffer, you hear shit.
Right.
Back then, they were talking about bringing Russia to its knees before it was coming back up. Like what they said was, it will hurt. Russia will never have a seat at the table. They will never be. And all of this has been in public documents. So I'm not like spilling tea. But I heard it with my own ears. Like I'm not. Heard it in meetings. And
there's footage. I think there was just a video that surfaced. I mean, it's been out there for a while, but I think Sabby Sab shared it around of Biden saying, like in 1997, they don't like NATO expansion? Well, tough shit. What are they going to do about it? Just talking all that bluster.
And what he said, like, listen what he just said a few months ago. He said, no one fucks with a Biden.
Right.
That's mafia. That's like,
I was just thinking that sounds very Sopranos.
Right.
Yeah.
What? We're gonna expand NATO. What? They got a fucking problem?
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Take care of this.
Exactly.
I don't even want to give him that much credit. He's more like I don't know. He's more like a Fredo from The Godfather.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's how I would. That's very good.
Hunter is, I guess. Maybe Hunter is.
well, speaking of Russia, Ukraine, Tara, you reminded me to mention this at the top of the show, and I had every intention of doing so, but you are going to be a guest speaker at the Rage Against the War Machine rally on February 19th in Washington, D.C. That's being sponsored by the different organizations you could see right under the title there. The two main ones are, as I understand, the People's Party and the Libertarian Party, which speaks to a sort of cross-partisan coalition that Russell was talking about, how it's odd that, people on the left, such as Russ and I won't speak for you, Tara, but, we're finding more common ground on these key issues with the populist right than we are in most of what we would call left circles, not just liberal circles, but left circles. I mean, if Bernie Sanders is not on the American left, then what is? You want to nitpick whether he's real left or fake left? All right, we can have
Right.
that conversation for hours some other night. But if he doesn't pass for left in America, then there is no left.
Right.
And like you said, there's been not a peep from him. So how'd you get involved with that rally? And yeah, you must be looking forward to that.
Yeah, I am looking forward to that. And I'm sorry. Yeah, in fact, Angela is going to be on Kim Iverson's show tomorrow. As you know, I'm producing that show, and Kim wanted to have a guest on to speak about that. So she's going to be on tomorrow. Angela McArdle is the chairperson for the National Libertarian Party. Joining with her are parties from, it's pretty politically diverse. So I was reached out to by her, and that's how I came to know, and knew about that event. And then they graciously asked me to speak. I guess Jimmy Dore is speaking and some other people. And I think they're even probably getting some more speakers. Max Blumenthal, of course, will be there.
Okay, great.
And, I will probably send a videotape because I'm working during that time, but I am, if I can try to be there physically, I will try, but I'm not sure that is.
Oh, but they could probably like stream you in or have you record a statement and play it on a screen. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So either way, but I really think that there's been no anti-war movement. I can't believe it. We have spent, this was the most we've spent on a defense budget in history, $880 billion, almost $1 trillion. If we raise the budget that much next year, we will surpass it and fund the defense $1 trillion. I can't even imagine. Meanwhile, it would cost $220 billion to really put a dent in homelessness. It would cost, $440 billion to address, food insecurity. And we're handing it over to Ukraine, right? Billions of dollars just going to Ukraine. It's not being, it's not being checked. Where the weapons are going is not being monitored. The president of Nigeria said some of the weapons are ending up there in the hands of terrorists. Interpol has put out a warning that Europe is getting flooded with weapons because they're selling them on the black market. There's no accounting. There's no, it's ridiculous. And we're sending billions. And I think, this is my opinion, my projection is that within a couple of years, this will be revealed as the biggest elite money laundering scam in history. And who's suffering are the Ukrainian people, the working people, the Russian working people, and American and Europeans. But the elites, the predator class, they're just lining their pockets. Raytheon, Lockheed Martin. So yeah,
I heard BlackRock just signed a contract to be part of the rebuild in Ukraine.
Of course they did.
Yeah,
of course they did. They're going to pocket a lot of it.
Disaster capitalism, baby.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, that actually brings up, you were asked to go and speak to the United Nations by Russian officials about this issue, about weapons trafficking. Mm-hmm. And the UN refused, or they stopped you from doing it. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Actually, I had a conversation with them about speaking. I'd done a lot of research on it, and they'd seen some of my, what I just did, some of my big opinions about this. And I've been doing a lot of studying of that issue. And I've also been having conversations with Professor Kovalek, Dan Kovalek, who is a human rights lawyer and professor. And I went ahead and gave him my research, and he had his own, and he went ahead and he presented at UN. But what happened was I was asked to present at the UN Security Council. I was all ready to do so. I got an email invitation video link and so I was getting ready to present. And then it's like an hour or two before, Biden's team got a hold of, apparently in the background, that's what I hear, unofficially, got a hold that I might be doing that. Anyway, all of a sudden I got another email unceremoniously canceling the link. So then we got Dan. I called up Dan and I said, you're up. Because I had a feeling.
You talk about late notice to have to present to the UN on a half hour's notice.
Yeah, he already knew. I had called him in advance because I had a feeling, because of Biden, by every time I've tried to make any kind of career advancement or any kind of legitimate, I get stopped by his team.
Right.
Yes, I knew. So I had contacted days before. I had contacted Dan and I said, hey, could you do this? Would you be interested as a backup? Because I had heard that they had been canceling every speaker they had. Originally, I think they wanted, of course, Scott Ritter, who would have been the most logical person. He was the whistleblower for the weapons of mass destruction for Iraq. And he knows a lot about details about weapons. So, there you have it.
Yeah.
So I was
and they canceled him. They canceled Scott Ritter.
They canceled Scott Ritter. They wouldn't have him. No.
Wow.
So they wouldn't consider his name. I feel really bad because the Russian delegation was just trying to get the issue heard, right? And they can't even get a meeting because everything. We're living in this really horrible time right now. It's just a horrible, horrible timeline. I feel like I want to jump it like out of this timeline because we're just headed head on into World War III. And I mean, many of us know it. You as a journalist, you must feel it coming.
You asked at the top about why I was going to India. That's part of why. I keep telling Keaton, a big part of why I'm doing this now. Mm-hmm. I don't believe we're going to live in a world in 10 years where you can go gallivanting off to India. I don't believe that this is going to be possible eventually. So I feel like anything like this I want to do, get it out of the way now. Get it out of the way because we're not going to be living in that world later. So I wanted to ask you about this because I am fascinated by how left voices, or, however you want to define yourself, dissident voices are pushed out of the mainstream discourse. Even someone like Noam Chomsky, agree with him, disagree with him, whatever. He's one of the world's most revered public intellectuals for decades. Right. You cannot make a credible argument that when you're having a roundtable on CNN, Chomsky should never make an appearance, but he never will. So when all of this was exploding, you wrote this was one of the first cases I found, maybe you can correct me, where they really started smearing you with the Russia thing. You wrote an op-ed for RT before they basically became, outlaw organization. I believe AOC's claims that she was sexually assaulted. Why won't she believe me? And this tweet was pretty typical of the response here. You may actually remember it because you responded to it at the time. Tara Reade just wrote an op-ed for RT, the Kremlin-run propaganda network that regularly pushes disinformation onto U.S. audiences. U.S. intelligence agencies have warned that Russia uses RT as part of its information warfare efforts against Americans. Strange choice for an op-ed. Now, whenever I see this kind of thing, it's very heads we win, tails you lose.
Yeah.
You can't get a platform on CNN.
Right.
But then when you go where you can get a platform, then it's proof. It's very much like you're not a witch if you drown, and if you float, you are, and then we burn you. Right? It's a no-win scenario. Glenn Greenwald gets this, obviously very prominently. Jimmy Dore, because who are you going to go on other than Tucker, other than Megyn Kelly? Right. You're not going to get a fair interview from Anderson Cooper. So can you speak a little bit to that? Because it's fascinating to me how many people have just kind of been exiled and then they get blamed for going where they can speak.
You said it perfectly. I think the most recent example of that is Matt Taibbi. Matt Taibbi is doing this fabulous job of lifting up truth right now that nobody wants. At least no one on the left, Democrats, mainstream, or the neolibs, they don't want to hear it. They don't want to admit to it. And even some Republicans, right, that are considered more acceptable moderate. I would say that Matt Taibbi is getting the brunt of that right now. He's just being used as a battering ram by his own colleagues. And you have to look at Julian Assange, right? When he's in prison in Belmarsh, and an Australian citizen, somehow it's okay to extradite him to America under the Espionage Act. He's not a US citizen, and he has to sit rotting in Belmarsh because he published truth. He's a journalist, and every journalist in the world should be worried about this, and they're not. And that's because they're not in Western corporate media. They're not real journalists. They're stenographers, you know? So yeah, you see him being attacked. And like, one thing I noticed too that was interesting is he has his own opinions, and every once in a while he'll write them. But mostly, like when he does journalistic stuff, it's very much, he just wants to get at the truth.
Yeah.
But he's being banned around for sounding too Republican or something. Maybe he is Republican. Who's for us to say? Just because he worked for Rolling Stone, I mean, who knows what his politics are? But the point is that the colleagues seem to, other journalists seem to glom onto the fact that, oh, he must be right wing, and then they attack him for working for oligarchs. They have the nerve to do that when Jeff Bezos owns Washington Post.
Yeah, astonishing.
I mean, come on. Bloomberg, you know, Bezos and the gang, right? So you're gonna like attack Matt Taibbi because he's actually doing real reporting and trying, and he's having to use a certain kind of platform to do it, which is really hard because it's not been done before. So I admire him because he's sticking it out, and he's brought forward a lot of truth that we needed to hear. I'm still kind of watching Elon Musk. I don't know. Like, I hope he's really for free speech. He says he's a free speech absolutist, but yet Scott Ritter got taken down.
Yeah,
and
Nixon, yeah.
So I'm still kind of watching that. So we'll see. We'll see. I don't know.
All righty. Well, you are a producer on the Kim Iverson Show. You have your own show. Do you want to talk about some of the work you're doing now? Obviously, Kim Iverson is, you know, thought to be a populist. Some accuse her of being right-wing, and maybe she is in some ways. But I know that, you know, you've been working on that show, and you have your own show. So do you want to talk about, before we sign off, what you're up to now, where people can get in touch with you, how people can support your work?
Great. Yeah. Kim Iverson is on live every day at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern on Rumble exclusively, like Glenn Greenwald and Russell Brand. So they're part of that group there. She's got her own live show. It's fabulous. I'm honored to be a producer on her show. Today, she did a piece that her piece that she did on Davos, which was, I recommend you watch today's show because it's stunning. It's the first segment of the day. And she talks about how they're planning to criminalize speech in Europe, or they're already started. They're criminalizing hate speech. But what they define as hate speech is interesting, and they're trying to bring it to the U.S. And the person announced that they're going to be bringing it to the U.S. That's something to watch. Watch that segment. So go check her out. I am Politics of Survival. I'm every Monday at 7 p.m. live. Thank you to Indy and Reef, who help with that show so much. Reef is amazing, and Indy is too. They do a million things all the time, and they're really a good place for independent creators. And that's what we have to do. Support shows like yours, support shows that are independent thinking and all different kinds of thinking, right? And I have coming up, Johnny Miller will be coming up from Donbass Live. He'll be coming on the show soon. I just had Chairman O'Malley from the Uhuru Group, who had the FBI raid. Yeah, so that was a really good interview. Check it out. You know, they're facing indictment for the FARA Act, which is ridiculous. Chairman O'Malley is 80 years old. He has been an activist in the African socialist movement here in America for 50 years. And he said it eloquently on his show. I don't need Russia to tell me what to think, is what he said. And he's right. He's been, he's quite a wonderful activist. And we need to support the Uhuru Group and the African Black Socialist Group from being targeted by the US government, which they're being targeted by. So yeah, I'm doing shows like that. I want to lift people up that aren't heard as much. I want to push back on xenophobia. I want to end this proxy war against Russia via Ukraine that's using Ukraine as a battering ram, basically. You know, NATO is. So I want to be part of that movement that ends it. We don't need any more billions going to Ukraine. We need it here in the United States. We need it for our citizens.
Tara, thank you so much for making the time. Really appreciate it. You're very brave and very honest and very, very thoughtful. It was great to meet you. And,
thank you very much. It's been a great honor. Thank you very much, Tara.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Please clap.